Today we're going to be looking at how the French Revolution spreads, and in particular, sort of where it goes to after it leaves France, and where does it start to sort of consume other parts of neighboring countries, and how does it emerge as within France in the 1792 to 1794 period. So after the French Revolution kicks off in the summer of 1789, for the next couple of months from 1789 through to about 1791 or so, the revolution is relatively peaceful, at least relatively compared to what it's going to be again in the 1792 to 1794 period. This is the period where there's some major constitutional changes that occur, right? So there's the period where you have a change in the civil constitution of the clergy, meaning that more people are, the priests lose their rights. They can't collect tithes anymore. They really become almost like employees of the national government. You have the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen, and you have the beginning of a constitution that will look to limit the power of the king. However, by about 1792 or so, the revolution is spreading north and spreads into the Low Countries, right? What today are the Netherlands and Belgium. The French Revolution, the government under the National Assembly, is looking to establish what they would call sister republics. Now, this Habsburg area in the Low Countries had been looking to break away from the larger Habsburg regions in Spain and in Austria for a number of years. They had been overlooked largely by their fellow countries, or by their fellow Habsburg realms, and there were anti-Austrian, anti-Habsburg leadership fights that went on throughout much of this period. In 1792, Thomas Paine wrote a book called The Rights of Man. So Thomas Paine, I'm sure many of you remember, is the famous British author who comes to the United States, what becomes the United States, and he writes Common Sense publishes Common Sense in 1776, which helps lead to the Declaration of Independence in the summer of 1776. Thomas Paine goes back to Europe in the 1790s and finds himself in Paris in the midst of the revolution. He writes two books, The Age of Reason and The Rights of Man. The Rights of Man talks about the sort of, as the name would suggest, these inalienable rights that people have and how governments need to protect those, not take those away. This book becomes extremely popular. Again, there's this sort of growing nationalism that's within a lot of these countries for the people of the Netherlands and what will become Belgium, the Low Countries. The Austrians were hundreds of miles away and not like them. So the control of these places became, was in question. The other part to this is that there's a large Catholic contingent in Belgium, and they were disagreeing with this push towards independence. Again, they were outnumbered. They were going to be the minority. And Austria is a Catholic country, so there was this big concern about losing their rights and privileges. So France winds up invading Belgium in the winter of 1792-73, and they put Dumouriez into power. Belgium has him in power, and he's a conservative. He's looking towards trying to restore Belgian order in Belgium, and one of the big things that happens is as the French are having their revolution, people are just thinking that this is all going too far too quickly. and there is a major push, particularly within Belgium, but also in what will become the Netherlands, to try and stop the massive spread of violence and disorder that is coming out of France and into Belgium, or into the Low Countries. Robespierre, the Maximilien Robespierre, the famous French revolutionary, right, emerges in France in this period. As a as a continuing force within French government. And there's a new party that's formed called the Mountain, that he is the leader of. It's a more radical party, one that is a radical revolutionary, radical Republican party. And he is, he finds himself in Belgium and trying to advocate for the Republic. Now, one of the major events that occurs in 1792 to 1793 is the flight to Varennes, but sometimes I call it the flight as far as Varennes. So Louis XVI is not liking the constitutional changes that he is being forced to adopt. And in June of 1792, he takes his family and they flee Paris. You remember they had been in Paris since the fall of 1789. So he tries to flee with them to Austria. His wife, Marie Antoinette, her family is the ruling family of Austria. So they try to flee to Austria to get some assistance. They leave Paris disguised. They flee to the northeastern portion of France to try and get to Austria. They are caught. They are brought back to France under house arrest. Throughout the summer, there's debate, but ultimately on August 10th, 1792, the king's office is abolished. So there's no longer a monarchy in France. It is the first republic. Throughout the fall now of 1792, there is debate over his treason, over his acts of deceit, and Louis is ultimately executed in January of 1793. This is a major moment, right? For a lot of European countries that were who did not support the revolution, but also who didn't want to get involved, this was a major moment. When you kill the king, regicide is a huge event, because if you can kill one king, you can kill others. And this sort of aggravates the political class and motivates them to side on the side of the conservative movement. This creates a massive backlash too among the people. So it's often easy to think about. The French Revolution happens all over France, but not all parts of France were so excited. One such place is the Vendée. Now, the Vendée is in northwestern France, and the Vendée is a largely Catholic region close to the border with the Low Countries. And there's an outbreak of violence there in counter-revolutionary fashion. And they're suppressed by the Committee of Public Safety, Robespierre, and other Republican leaders, Republican here being a small R Republican, who want to try and keep the revolution going. So there's a large number of emigres who leave from this region and go to places like Austria or Britain, and they start what are called Republican baptisms, where they basically take a whole bunch of people, largely Catholics, a lot of priests, tie them to a platform, and then just start putting rocks on it so that the platform sinks and drowns all of these people. There's massive rounds of de-Christianization, right? So again, as this pendulum swings, right, there's de-Christianization, basically taking churches and destroying Christian iconography, destroying churches themselves. Famously, the Cathedral of Notre Dame in the center of Paris is turned into the Temple of Reason. So there are different, ways that they are trying to, again, punish people, get rid of the old order. In the Jacobin Club, right, this sort of radical political party that is forming in Paris, they're beginning to communicate with each other, and there's becoming more popularity outside of just Paris. This is part of what's called the Levée en Masse, and also the representatives on mission go out to try and convert people and spread the message of, the French Revolution and get people on their sides. In terms of trying to change the French society, there's a couple of major things that they do. One of the things that happens in terms of the economy was to try and stabilize it. And one of the things they do is they print assignats. So assignats are these. It's the currency of the French Revolution. So basically, the land is confiscated from the church, and when the land is confiscated from the church, they use that to prop up their economy, and they print assignats in that fashion. Now, the problem with the assignats here is that they were extremely undervalued. At one point, in the really rough years in the 1794 era, you have the value going down to like 1/10 of what it says on its face. So it's a very unstable money currency, but again, it's sort of the money of the French Republic. The other thing that they do is they pass a new calendar. So the old calendar was very Christian-y. It had, it was based on Jesus' birth. The names were very historic and tradition-filled, so they changed it. So the Republican calendar starts in September of 1792, and that's when year one is, 1792 to 1793. The months all begin at the equinox, right? So the first of the first day is what we would consider sort of September 21st. And then it goes from September 21st to October 21st. Weeks had 10 days, hours had 100 minutes. It was the beginning of the metric system. Now, no one really uses this outside of the government. For the most part, the average people still use the old system of timekeeping. The other thing that that happens here is the Reign of Terror. So the Reign of Terror starts in September 1793, goes until July 1794. And this is when the Committee of Public Safety, the 6-member executive committee with Robespierre, Saint-Just, and others, start to have massive paranoia, and they're rooting out enemies of the people. There's massive amounts of guillotining. And again, this is not all equal. Most of the people who are guillotined come from the heavily resistance areas, right? So the Vendée, other parts of northern France, southeastern France, near the border with what is today Italy. All this time, though, Robespierre is becoming more and more nervous. He survives an assassination attempt. He has a nervous breakdown, and in February of 1794, he gives a speech called Terror Justified, where he talks about how terror is good for the people, right? Because terror, so killing people without virtue, terror, killing people without a reason is murder, and virtue without terror is useless. So he's really trying to say that we're doing this for the Republic. We're doing this to build up the country and to preserve ourselves. Again, Robespierre experiences another breakdown, and by the summer of 1794, Robespierre is fearing for his life. He is arrested. They come for him, and they are trying to arrest him in July of 1794. He falls into an open-aired sewer. He is arrested. He tries to commit suicide by stealing a gun and shooting himself. He misses, so he is left in pain for over a day, and ultimately he is guillotined on the morning in July 1794. This begins the Thermidorian reaction. So the Thermidorian reaction is where the French Revolution, where the reign of terror comes to an end, and the sort of craziness of the French Revolution stops. Robespierre is dead. The revolutionary fervor peaked earlier in the reign of terror in 1793. The bourgeoisie, those rich landowners, lawyers, merchants, are rejecting the sort of bad revolution, the property damage that is occurring, and people are starting to look for reform. And that's where the Directory, the body that will ultimately bring Napoleon Bonaparte to power, comes about.